All right, hello again, everybody. This is Sean and Mariah Campbell. We've got our second power couple presenting. They're doing it on tort. So I know in one section it says group 12, another section says group 13. So just be aware that this is the information on tort and tort reform. So I'll go ahead and turn the time on over to them. Go ahead, you're up, guys.
All right, thanks for joining us to discuss tort reform. The first thing we'll do, we'll switch to the next slide and define tort. So tort is a civil, not criminal, wrong committed against a person or property excluding breach of contract. Now we'll break this down into two categories, as it can either be intentional or unintentional. And unintentional torts or negligence are the most frequently occurring types of cases in the healthcare industry. Next slide. So intentional torts, some examples are assault, battery, trespass, fraud, deceit, invasion of privacy, and misuse of legal procedure. When one person intentionally harms another, the law allows the injured party to seek a remedy in a civil suit. The injured party can be financially compensated for any harm done by the tortfeasor. If the conduct is judged to be malicious, punitive damages may also be awarded. Intentional torts may also be crimes, so some civil wrongs may also be prosecuted as criminal acts in separate court actions. Next slide. Unintentional torts are the more common torts within the healthcare industry, and they are those that are committed unintentionally. They are acts that are not intended to cause harm, but are committed unreasonably or with disregard for the consequences. And in legal terms, this constitutes negligence. An unintentional tort is alleged when one may have performed or failed to perform an act that a reasonable person would or would not have done in similar circumstances. Next slide. Is tort reform necessary? There is a strong trend toward increased litigation in healthcare cases, resulting in the need for tort reform. Our society has become much more litigious, and the number of healthcare-related torts, as well as the size of the awards, have had an enormous effect on the cost of medicine, especially in the area of medical malpractice insurance. The most frequent occurrences are OBGYN, plastic surgery, and general surgery. Next slide.
Okay, it's my turn. I'm Sean. I'm going to be talking about tort reform in Texas. One of the greatest causes of the rise in the cost of medical malpractice insurance is the combined effect of A, the trend towards more litigation, and B, the trend towards higher awards to patients who have been injured or compromised by healthcare providers. The state of Texas has passed strong tort reforms. Next slide, please. Okay, so what happened in Texas? From 2000 to 2003, malpractice insurance premiums in Texas increased by 147%. By 2003, 1 out of every 4 Texas doctors had a malpractice claim against them. Supporters of the law claim that physicians were fearful of practicing medicine in Texas, causing many to leave the state. And in 2003, the Texas tort reform law took effect. The law limits most malpractice suits to $250,000. Next slide. So why was tort reform excluded from Obamacare? President Barack Obama specifically disallowed tort reform to be included in the reformation of the healthcare industry in 2009. At a Northern Virginia town hall meeting in August 2009, former DNC Chairman Howard Dean explained why the Obamacare could not be included in tort reform provisions that, according to many experts, would save up to $40 billion in healthcare costs each year and $400 billion over a decade. Quote, "Here's why tort reform is not in the bill," said Dean. "When you go to pass a really enormous bill like that, the more stuff you put into it, the more enemies you make. And the reason the tort reform is not in the bill is because the people who wrote it did not want to take on the trial lawyers in addition to everyone else that they were taking on. And that is the plain and simple truth," unquote.
And that concludes our presentation on tort reform.
All right, very good. Thank you. You ready for just a couple questions?
Sure.
All right. So you talked about how tort reform is a civil suit. So what is the difference between a civil suit and a criminal suit?
A civil suit is one that's usually has to do with monetary claims. And what I mean by that is that a doctor or healthcare institution can be sued by somebody. It's not a criminal suit. It's to get a monetary reward.
Okay. You had also mentioned that the majority of healthcare suits or torts were unintentional torts. Can you guys provide some examples of unintentional torts that you came across in your readings, or that you can use for an example that might come up?
I don't recall any specific ones. It mentions that OBGYN, plastic surgery, and general surgery were the ones with most frequent occurrences in lawsuits. But that's as specific as it got. I mean, there were stories that we read, about claims of negligence by the doctors, but I don't recall any details other than that.
Can you think of any examples that you could come across that would be negligence from the doctor? Some specific things.
Well, the one I remember was, and I don't remember. It was some kind of head injury, and the doctor couldn't get a hold of the doctor, and it turns out he was out with his family for dinner, and it was up to 5 hours before he made it to the hospital. And by that time, there was too much damage to the young man's brain, and he passed away. That's the only one I can remember that was, really hit home.
Yeah, well, that's a good example. We also had another thing on slide on there. Is tort reform necessary? Do you think it was or is necessary?
Well, I mean, in the case of Texas, it was. 1 out of every 4 Texas doctors has a claim against them. A lot of them are afraid to even practice in the state. And when you're second guessing yourself, I mean, that could cause more harm than good. So I would say that, yeah, it's necessary, but it's really difficult to say exactly what needs to be changed, at least as far as I'm concerned. Because you want to have that option to be able to file a lawsuit, because there is negligence, but at the same time, once a big monetary award is granted, then that kind of sets the bar a little bit higher. It's kind of like a baseball player. Once you hire someone at $250 million over a 5-year contract, that kind of sets the standard for the rest of the league. Same with medical lawsuits. Once you set a really high bar for monetary compensation, then that kind of sets a standard, and now is the case in Texas, and that's why a lot of doctors are leaving the state.
Okay. You touched on something a little bit there. Whether we've heard of it called as tort or tort reform or not, obviously we're at least somewhat aware of people suing doctors or people suing hospitals. And you talked about how it's a difficult balance. Through your research or your opinion before, what do you think that balance should be at? Did you like the idea that Texas had of having that type of restriction? Did you find that it helped? Where's your opinion on tort reform and torts as a whole?
Well, that's what I wasn't real sure about. Yeah, I mean, it seems like a good idea to limit they limited it to $250,000, and that seems like a good idea. But at the same time, I mean, if I'm on the other end ever, then I might, my opinion can change like that. And so, but I mean, something needed to be done, because you had so many doctors leaving the state, and it wasn't really clear if it was. I mean, it depended on who you talked to. Those in favor said it helped. Those the opposed said it didn't. And people were saying that there's more doctors coming into the state. Well, the economy's growing. There's more people moving into the state, including more doctors. So I don't know. That was something that I couldn't really figure out. But yeah.
Okay, that was actually going to be my last question: is if you felt like, or if you noticed that the tort reform in Texas did help or not. But it sounds like it's somewhat inconclusive depending on the point of view.
Yeah, it depends on who you talk to. I mean, yeah, I see that's going to be the case in anything really. Those in favor are going to, look at the negative or the positives, and those that are against it are going to look at the negatives. And so, everyone's going to come up with information that's going to back their beliefs or their wants. And so, I just real quick. I mean, I had a really good friend that was a nurse anesthetist, and she was sued. And this is one of the most meticulous people that I know. She paid attention to detail. They have to tell them the risk before they administer anesthesia. And this lawsuit just dragged on and on and on. And she was from Japan, which is it's another culture. And she ended up not being able to deal with it. She hung herself. So this is something that hit home. This is why I picked the subject. And that for a while there, I was kind of on her side of it, but at the same time, I mean, if I ever have to, on the other end where a doctor was negligent, and my family needed to be compensated, excuse me, I could very easily switch sides, and it's a hard subject to tackle.
Yeah, and I think you touched on that well. That's a difficult balance to find because, like you said, there's a matter of justice and mercy on both sides of the spectrum. You want to be sure that the doctors or healthcare administrators, nurses, whoever it might be, you want to be sure that they're doing their job, that they're competent in what they're trained to do, and that they stay on top of it the whole way. At the same time, you don't want people taking advantage of the situation in itself. You don't want them suing people like crazy, so that you have doctors or healthcare workers fleeing even from the state, like you mentioned in Texas. That's going to bring the overall quality of healthcare within Texas down significantly if you don't have doctors wanting to work there because they're afraid of being sued.
Absolutely.
And you hear about, OBGYN, that's one of the physicians where the malpractice insurance is one of its highest. And so that's why you don't get as many competitive doctors, you'd say, that go into that practice as often or as much because they're afraid of the cost of malpractice lawsuits and then also just getting sued all in itself. So very good. I think you guys covered that very well. Anything you would like to leave the class before I let you go?
No, just want to say thank you for your time, and this has been a good experience and something that we put a lot of thought into, and kind of it's hard to fall on one side or the other because you see both sides, and you hope that they can strike a balance and reform if they do decide to reform it. And I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you guys for putting the time into it. I hope these presentations, as stressful as they might be at times, I hope they're worthwhile and that they'll be a little bit of a lasting impression on you as we go on through other classes and everything too. So thanks for your hard work on it.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
you guys
you
have a great rest of the weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks,
You
you
too.
too.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.